Joining us in the studio to talk about this more, Jason Johnson, Mary Kate Cary, and Wayne Fields. Jason Johnson is an author and professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University. Mary Kate Cary is the former speechwriter for President George H.W. Bush. She's also a senior fellow for presidential studies at the University of Virginia's Miller Center. Wayne Fields is the author of Union of Words, A History of Presidential Eloquence. He's also a professor at Washington University, St. Louis. Thank you all for joining us. Wayne, let me start off with you. Was that a speech of eloquence?
No. Anyone who expected it, though, hasn't been listening to Donald Trump, because part of his appeal has been a certain amount of contempt for eloquence. The assumption that plain speaking is somehow more reliable if it has a kind of crudeness to it, if it is disrespectful to what the elite might expect. So it seems to me that it's exactly what we should have expected. Yeah.
And what about you, Meg?
Yeah, well, the speechwriter in me could see the sort of cut and paste job.
I was watching your face. Oh, no, I don't know why they said that.
You know, there were lines there, for example, I will never let you down was from his Republican National Convention address. The forgotten men and women will be forgotten no longer was from election night. The whole, what we would call a peroration, the wind up at the end, was straight out of his campaign stump speech. So a lot of it was familiar, a lot more God in there than I thought there would be.
Yes.
And there was something for everybody.
Well, Bible is his favorite book, isn't it? So,
apparently.
so
and he had something for everybody. If you were anti-establishment, you got that. If you were looking to talk about how things need to improve, there was plenty of evidence for where things have gone wrong. There were some notes of unity in there, but there was that same, as you're saying earlier, America first was the resounding theme of it. The most interesting line to me was the time for empty talk is over now, the hour of action has arrived. And to me, that's where the chips will start to fall, and we'll see no more empty talk now. What is he going to do?
That's a good point, because nobody really knows what promises are real, what will be kept.
Right.
So Jason, what does he need to now keep? He laid a bit of a framework out there for what he's going to do, didn't he?
Well, he did, but it was mostly a campaign speech. Yeah. And I agree with Mary Kay. I'll start with this line. You know, now is the hour for action, which is amazing because he announced that after the inauguration, he's taking the weekend off. Yeah. He also said during this speech that if your heart is filled with patriotism, there is no room for prejudice. Right after his speech was over, there was a tweet by David Duke, head of the Ku Klux Klan, former head of the Ku Klux Klan, saying, "We did it, we got him into the White House." So, again, the speech was typical of Donald Trump. It was a campaign speech. If he gets into office on Monday after he takes his vacation, it'll be important to see that he actually implements policy. He has said that they are going to roll out their new plan for the Affordable Care Act. He has said he's going to bring jobs back. When those things happen, we'll see his numbers change. But there was nothing groundbreaking about this speech. And if anything, it was what we've heard for the last 18 months.
And other than a little bit of hostility towards the establishment, there was as well towards countries that have taken American jobs, as he put it. We're going to protect our borders. What does that mean for countries like Mexico?
Well, it means that he is going to at least publicly continue to promote this myth that he's going to get Mexico to build a wall, or now we're going to build a wall and then somehow get Mexico to reimburse us for it like it's a dinner date or something. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work. But he's going to say things like that. I mean, the reality is the connection between actual policy and what Donald Trump has said, it's never been there. I mean, he said he was going to build the wall, then he said he wasn't going to build the wall. He said he was going to ban all Muslims from this country, then he said he wasn't going to ban Muslims. He said that everybody bleeds the same, and black and brown and different kinds of people bleed the same. He doesn't mention Muslims. He doesn't mention Mexicans. Maybe they don't bleed the same. So, I mean, we don't know. And I think that's one of the things about this speech. You can only infer so much from someone who's been so inconsistent in what they say and then what they do.
I'm wondering what you think about the Bush's camp. You wrote many speeches for the father. I mean, what would they have been thinking hearing that? Would anything have resonated with them? Is there anything that they could support in that speech and work with?
You know, it was not a particularly gracious speech, especially to the people on the dais next to him.
Yeah.
And so I think I would have loved to be a fly on the wall at the Bush's house right now and hear what they're thinking. I think they're trying to give the guy a chance. It's only the first day, which we should all do. And I think there's probably great comfort to the Republicans that the House and the Senate can be somewhat of a barometer in reining him in a little. If, for example, he were to impose a border tax, the House and Senate would have to approve that. If he starts tweeting about, relations with Israel, there's nothing anybody can do. But as far as he's on domestic policy and on policies that affect approval by the House and Senate, treaties, taxes, things like that, there is some hope of kind of keeping him on the rails. So I assume that establishment Republicans like the Bushes would probably take great comfort in that.
Keeping him on the rails when it comes to tweeting and communicating, I mean, that's pretty important now as the president. He cannot unleash the sort of tweets that we've seen up until recent days. How are they going to keep him in control? And what is the thought amongst his closest about how to lead that passion of his?
Well, I have no idea how they think they can do the latter. I think what we saw today, and this is the first words that you hear from somebody who serves in a role that is unprecedented in their experience, and almost always those words begin with some sign of humility. Dwight Eisenhower comes out as leader of the free world through a major world war and begins with prayer out of his need for support and strength and understanding and acknowledging the ways in which he can make mistakes. First President Bush begins with prayer in the same sort of way. It seems to me that at the moment in which we get to see if this person can become larger than themselves, which the office calls for, can become the voice of all the people, the way he's asserting he will, and he sort of then retreats into, I will tell you who all the people are. And it's very exclusive. It limits all kinds of things. So the lack of historical context is troubling me.
Right. And if he doesn't start with that needed humility, I mean, where you wonder where that'll lead him, and I'm talking about as far as checks and balances go as well.
Well, he seems largely to imagine that he has a kind of support base that allows him to do things that will overrun the rest of the system, the way he sort of overran the campaign. At one point he says, it's only the future now. And at no point does he look at the past. At no point does he contextualize his presidency. At no point does he see the ways in which other presidents have worked to achieve change and what they've done and what they've succeeded and failed at. It's a remarkable presumption, and especially when you promise it will happen right now. It's going to happen today. And this is a different day now because he's president. He's no longer the candidate.
As you say, he's going to start after the weekend.
Right.
How long will people give him to deliver on these promises?
Well, here's both the interesting and disturbing thing about the Trump presidency. You have someone who has unprecedented power, right? I mean, again, the presidency has become more powerful under Bush, under Obama, unprecedented power, and then he controls every single branch of government, right? They control the House, they control the Senate, they will soon control the Supreme Court, and yet he has a very small constituency that is spread out in different kinds of places that is easy to pander to. So he's going to have a tremendous amount of time. Remember, this is a president who is president with unprecedented powers who lost the popular vote by 3 million people. I go back to what Donald Trump said during the campaign when he said, I could march down Fifth Avenue in New York and shoot somebody in the head and you guys would still support me. He has an unlimited amount of time from his actual supporters. So the real question is not when he's going to get things done. The real question is, will there become a time where his potential failures become so dangerous or problematic politically that some members of Congress say, I have to back off of him? Because if that doesn't happen, he's unchecked. He'll do whatever he wants for the next 4 or possibly 8 years.
Because they could probably see from today, from one of the marches, that there isn't that support that he believed he had, the millions of numbers.
But here's the catch. As a member of Congress, I'm just looking at my home district. It doesn't matter if Donald Trump's approval ratings could be 22%, but if 100% of the people in my home district support me and supporting him, I'm going to keep voting for his policy. So that's the strange place. We don't have a president right now who's really beholden to the majority of the population. We have a president who's beholden to small constituencies, and if they're happy, he's going to do what he wants.
Doing what he wants, he's suggested that he will dismantle almost everything Barack Obama has put together. He has also said that he'll cut the funding to some public broadcasters, pretty important ones, well respected, the arts, agencies that protect women. That's not going to go down well.
No, he's certainly developed a reputation as a disruptor. And the question is, how much of it can he actually achieve? And I think there's a big crowd out there, most of whom follow him on Twitter, who aren't necessarily listening to the establishment and the media, and who do want to change things up, and that explains how he won. I think it explains why he won't give up his Twitter feed. He wants to keep a direct pipeline to those people. This was, in addition to being a very America First speech, it was a very populist speech. It was the first sentence out of his mouth was about the citizens of this country. And so I think that has great appeal for people who are frustrated with the direction of the country. We've had 70% of the people think we've been on the wrong track now. And for
not only
10 years.
In the US, I mean, he's part of a wave that we're seeing in many parts of the country, particularly in Europe.
Right. It's Brexit, the Chicago Cubs winning. There's been all kinds of surprises. Yeah. Right, Le Pen. And I think that is not surprising. There's a great deal of frustration worldwide, I think, with the way things have been going. And he may not achieve everything that he's promising, as you're asking, but I think he will continue to disrupt.
But internationally, then, he's setting himself up with quite a few allies. We know that he's pretty close to Putin. I mean, you've studied presidents of the past, and obviously he's someone like we've never seen before. What do you make of the Russia controversy and how it should be dealt with now? Well,
it's a very unique situation. I mean, we went through most of the 20th century following up on sort of the benchmarks we give our history. There's the American Revolution. We have to be true to that. Then there's the Civil War. We were true to that. And to the 20th century, being true to the Civil War was interpreted as freeing the slaves of the rest of the world, the slaves of Europe. And then after World War II, the slaves of communism. And always in that, the Soviet Union, and then after the Soviet Union, the Russians who had been a part of that as well as the new governments, were held in great suspicion and doubt. Now, all of a sudden, for him, this is to be pushed away. There's something admirable personally in Putin. And that's the other thing to remember. It doesn't seem to be about countries. It seems to be about personalities. And my relationship with him, not my relationship or understanding of Russia or of Russian history. That's where the level of misunderstanding that's constantly going to run into problems within the State Department, constantly going to run into problems in Congress, where there are very different levels of understanding of those players. But it comes at a time when all of the West seems to be suffering from an intense identity crisis. And in the United States, it's who are we? When he talks about all the people, one of the questions he needs to address, who are all of the people? Who are we? When he talks about making America great, in what does American greatness lie? FDR didn't say it was in our material success. He said it was in our values. So
they've all said that, haven't they? They've all promised to make it great and get closer and unify the country.
Yes.
Why has it been so hard to achieve that?
Well, because we are a very multicultural country, and because the United States was never set up to be a nation for everyone. It was not set up for black people. It was not set up for women to fully participate. Initially, it wasn't even set up for poor people to participate. So it is a goal that presidents claim they want to achieve, but structurally, we're not set up in any way for that to actually be accomplished anytime soon. I will say this, though, as far as Donald Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin, that has very, very serious consequences internationally. We've already had reports that you have State Department officials telling Israel you might want to be careful with sharing information with the U.S. because it may be leaked to Russia. You've got Andrea Merkel basically saying, look, we'll go it alone if the United States decides that they don't want to participate in NATO anymore. These kinds of relationships are problematic. And what it also leads to is this, given the fact that Russia was involved in the DNC hack, and you have large amounts of national security agencies who think that that's the case, it questions the very legitimacy of Donald Trump. He was elected president of the United States, there's no question, but the idea that there was such a blatant attempt by a foreign nation to be involved in that leads to many people in the United States doubting and questioning whether or not he's actually loyal to this country. And I think that's going to be a real problem going forward.
What do you think of the way that was all communicated and the fact that initially he was like, oh, absolutely not, Russia's got nothing to do with this, and then he admitted in his one of his most recent speeches that actually they might have been involved.
Right. Well, it seems that there's two different issues. There's this question over what is the definition of hacking an election. And I think that's why he was dismissive at first about, well, they didn't get into the voting machines, they didn't change the actual numbers. This was just releasing emails that were not denied. Nobody said those were false emails. So that was one sort of story, and I think that's why he was sort of dismissive of it. Then you had this dossier story, which is a whole different kettle of fish. And that, to me, pointed out the vulnerability in our system.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there because we are running out of time. But big thanks to Mary Kate Cary with those last words, Wayne Fields and Jason Johnson. And I'm going to hand you